Rainer Maria Rilke, one of my very favorite poets, writes, "I am circling around God, around the ancient tower, and I've been circling for 1,000 years, and I still don't know if I'm a falcon or a storm or a great song." Well, this little series has been called Crossroads in Uncharted Territory, and today's sermon is called Where Your Road Meets the Great Road, the premise being that our whole life is uncharted territory. We've never been there before, and yet as a human race over the centuries, we are part of a cosmos which is unfolding, and so it is extremely familiar to us at a deep level. And that there are moments when things cross each other, moments to pay attention, when something big and something small cross at the right moment in your life. And in thinking about it and feeling its power, you realize there's something happening. There's a word being spoken here to you. So this is where your road meets the great road. So what's your road? Well, I was thinking that your road is really your life from birth to death. That's the road that you build. I build one, you build one during our lifetimes. And the nature of that road is that it often takes a beating. Have you found it so? Like most roads built anywhere, there is wear and tear on them over time. They are affected by the heat and by the cold, by the flood and by the drought, by the traffic that's passing over it, by accident, sometimes by sabotage. I remember once interviewing a series of men and women who were basically street people, people who were addicted to things and living rough. This was in connection with an area hospital, and with the permission of these people, we asked them a set of specified questions. And we were surprised by the responses, I think, which probably tells you more about the questioner than those being questioned. In each case, every one of them felt that he or she was a person of worth. And in each case, every one of them felt that they were being looked after or looked over by some power greater than themselves. And in every case, every one of them mentioned an experience of having their small boat torpedoed at some time in their life, torpedoed right out from under them. One man said, "I came home and found my wife in bed with my best friend, and I picked up a bottle of something, and it's been patch ever since." And that's what the nature of their lives was. They were broken by something greater than themselves that simply had not been dealt with at that point in the road. A great pothole had emerged, and it was patch ever since. That was a great revelation to me. And our piece of the road is also influenced by others before we even get there. It's influenced by its location. Are we privileged or underprivileged in our life? Are we one or many? Are we on the outside of the system or are we inside it? Our piece of the road is influenced by the terrain over which we must cover and the time in which we live. Is ours a time of war or a time of peace, a time of plenty or a time of want? That will make the difference in the patch of road we build. I was watching on the news this morning those who have gone back to Dunkirk, the small number of old men and women who are left marching through the town of Dunkirk. And with tears in their eyes, they were relating the terrible things they had seen. "Far too terrible," said one, "for a 19-year-old ever to witness." Well, that's the terrain over which they had to build in their time and place. I was looking at the Great Ocean Road the other day. We went all the way out to Port Campbell, and the coach driver, who was excellent along the way, would show us patches of the original road occasionally. He'd look down among the tall trees, and there would be just a little strip of something like a twig. And then we saw the statue dedicated to those who had built the road, and we came to realize the back-breaking labor that it took to carve out that beautiful scenic drive. Those men knocked themselves out, killed themselves, building a patch of the road so that we in our time and place can enjoy its beauty and go places we've never been before. Well, I was thinking about Abraham's piece of the pavement. It's the fact that he knew very little about the earlier pieces, that you don't quite know what you're building on, do you? Oh, you get a few family stories from folk and you get an idea of who your particular grouping is or where you start, but from then on, it's up to you to build along the way. You just get a hint or a clue about who you are, what kind of tools you have in your hand for the building. Now, you read in the texts in the great story, and it is a story of Abraham, by the way, something that's been edited and edited and edited to suit the audience down the centuries of its telling, that he was a child of mystical origins. Way back in the beginning of the tale, it says that heavenly beings came and married earthly beings, and the two of them produced a heavenly earthly being filled with visions of great things and yet torn apart by small things. And this was part of the road of the history out of which Abraham would have to build his peace. He was also a flood survivor. If you read the story back further, he was related to Noah in some way. So his family had a memory of catastrophe, and catastrophe was always part of his thoughts. Perhaps made him a little gun-shy, perhaps made him a little hesitant about going forward. He was also a casualty of family warfare. Have you been a casualty of family warfare on your road? His family fought with each other in the family of his origin and in his own life. His wife unable to bear children. He fathered children by his concubines, and that didn't go over too well after a while, and one of them was banished, young Ishmael, banished with his mother out to the wilderness, and there was Abraham standing at the gate watching this lovely woman and this treasured child who's been banished. But that has to make a mark in your road. It has to make a rut somewhere where you're building. And he was also the son of a father who settled. His father was offered the same promise by the sacred, "Come with me to a land that I'll show you." And the story says in one little verse, but Terah decided to stay where he was. That has to do something to you when you're a young child and you're striving to see where the world will take you, and your father's sitting at home, staying put, and perhaps regretting his decision and marking you with the unfinished business of his own road. Well, there it was, Abraham's road. What has your road building experience been like? Who watches you from your past and quietly or loudly says, "Here, not there, there, not here"? Anyone come readily to mind? My mother always used to say to me all the years growing up, being an only child, "Be careful, son. Be careful, son. Crossing the road, be careful, son. Meeting people, be careful, be careful, be careful." And so I'm careful. Sometimes to my detriment, I think. There are a lot of fences I've peered tentatively over, and in retrospect, I wouldn't mind jumping over a few of them, but I never did because I was careful. What blueprint of a highway did you inherit? Is it a neat highway? Is it a bold highway? Is it a highway that goes off the beaten track? Is it a highway that breaks new ground? Is it a highway that follows tradition? Each of us has a certain heartbeat as to how life works. We've inherited that along the way. And what have you found when you've dug? Was it easy going? Was it hard going? Did you hit sand? Did you hit quicksand? Did you hit clay? Our cat died a number of years ago, and we put him in the freezer for a while because our kids weren't coming home from university for a while, and we wanted to be there for the big ceremony, so there was the cat in the freezer. And our young son would pick up the other cat and open the lid, and the deceased cat would be in a liquor bag. It seemed fitting at the time. And our young son would say to the young cat, still alive, "You see that? Watch your step." Well, they all came home on the night of my birthday. It was pitch dark in November where I live, and it was cold, and I'd spent the day digging a great hole in the backyard to bury the cat, and I got down about a foot, and I hit solid clay. I couldn't go any further, and so by the time everyone gathered, we all went out in the pitch dark. I carried a candle, and we carried flowers, and we laid the liquor bag in the hole, and my wife said, "You'd better say something, you're part of the clergy." I said, "Well, you were a great cat, and right now you're as stiff as a board." It wasn't exactly from any of our new liturgy, but I'm thinking of writing it, you see. Well, after that, they threw the flowers in the hole, and everyone took the lights and went into the house. And there I was standing in the pitch black with a dead cat at my feet, And I filled it in as best I could. I couldn't even see where the hole was. It was so dark. And the next morning, it looked like a battlefield from World War I out there. And our neighbors were commenting about how this group of people in a coven had gone out late at night with lights into the dark. And we're moving soon from that street. Well, that's what I found when I dug. Has it turned out to be what you expected, your road along the way, do you think? I was thinking about mine. I have a tried and tested love relationship going back several decades, for which I'm profoundly grateful, and I have great kids as part of a blended family, and we have a brood of little nestlings pecking away at our ankles when we get home. I have a few good friends, and I have a sea of colleagues and adventures and accomplishments along the way that I look at every so often, and I have a few trinkets and treasures that I keep, just a few, and I've made some mistakes, and I've known some disappointments, but in thinking about it, I never could have imagined that that would be the road down which I would have gone. Can you imagine the road down which you've gone, starting with be careful and ending up here? It is strange indeed. Well, for Abraham, the visit of the three strangers marked one of those crossroads where his road met the great road. You know, we may be entertaining angels unaware ourselves. Have you thought of that? Some visitors you meet along the way are great in their own right, but they don't do you a great deal of good. It's just nice to meet them. We met the Queen, almost. She was doing walkabout on her 50th anniversary of her reign, and we were in the little Scottish town of Wick. And she was going to walk right up the square, not much of a square, and we had placed ourselves an hour and a half early right against the front barrier so that when Her Majesty walked by, we could meet her. Well, soon you saw the little pink hat in the distance and the purse over the arm, and you knew who that was. And up she came, and just then a little Scottish woman, about 4 feet tall, elbowed her way into the front, elbowed me right in the ribs about 4 times, and said, "I've got to stand in the front. The Queen and I are the same age. I've got to wave at her." So, since I could well see over her, I let her stand there a while, and Her Majesty walked by just less than a meter away. But being good citizens of the Empire and members of the Commonwealth, you know you can't speak until you're spoken to. So she walked by, and I went, And about a meter away, some man yelled out, "Greetings from Dallas, Texas, Your Majesty." And she went over and talked to him for 10 minutes. And as she walked out of the square, I ran out into the street saying, "I'm from Canada." It did no good whatsoever. Well, it was lovely almost to meet her, and she's great in herself. I have great respect for her, but sometimes you meet people who are more than they appear, and the impact of the meeting lasts forever. I'm thinking about how I got here, aren't you? Dr. McNabb emailed me a note one day in response to something I'd sent to him. We'd never even met each other, and 2 years later I received a little email from him saying, "Would you come down here for 3 weeks?" I couldn't believe it. And occasionally you meet a really great person. I've met a few in my life, a really great person, and I've only met Dr. McNabb once, just for lunch, the second day we were here. And he said, "Here's the key. Make yourself at home. These people will be wonderful to you. Enjoy. Do it your own way." And I thought to myself, here is a great person. Just a great person for what he has done, what he's done with you, this wonderful place. And I'm going to carry that vision, that person with me for a long time. And we may never speak again, I don't know. But I know that I have met a great person. He has crossed my road. And being here among you is doing something more than I could have imagined too. There's a crossroad happening here for me. I think I used to dream often about having to leave a great city, and I always thought it was London. It looked a lot like London, and I would dream this recurring dream of knowing it was the last day and you had to leave and you had to pack up and you had to go into a narrow line and pass through a turnstile and get on an airplane, and the dream always ends with flying off into the darkness back towards home with a profound sense of sadness. And I was thinking about the dream. It recurs for me, has for several years. And as I was walking across the bridge the other day, I turned to Elspeth and I said, what if it's Melbourne? What if it isn't London at all? What if it's Melbourne? And this is part of the dream. It just bids thinking about, doesn't it? And so there has been a crossing here of my road with the great road, and I don't know fully what it means yet, but I'm going to take it home and gestate on it, because occasionally you receive these gifts along the way, and this is being one of them for me. Well, the incident on the Emmaus Road in Luke comes at a time of catastrophe. You've risked everything and you've put yourself out there and you've trusted with all your heart, and then your own culture, the group you've trusted all your life, turned on you and put to death that thing that brought you life. Communities of faith have always had to fight against that kind of devastation, you know, because in every generation we must prove ourselves again, bear witness again, change our inflection again to lift up that standard which means so much to us, that bright banner which means so much to us. In every generation we face such devastation. Robert Raines, my great American friend who is now in his 90s, remembers in his 50s, after his father, a Methodist bishop and a very powerful man, had died, remembers feeling the sort of the backwash of that experience. He said his wife was lecturing somewhere and he'd driven off for the afternoon, and he came across a senior citizen's home, and he drove through the parking lot and sat by the water's edge, and his life caved in on him. He wrote, "Only dreams, songs, and poems can help me escape from the dread of death and the fear of life, but my dreams are hidden from me now. My poetry is dried up, and songs sink into sighs." Have you ever felt that on your road when catastrophe hit you and all the things you dreamed about and loved were suddenly taken from you? I'm sure you have. This was the Messiah of grace and truth, they said. He has been thrown overboard to drown in our own culture. Our culture missed his significance, and we are all the losers because of it. Tragic. And there they were, walking along that road, away from Jerusalem, a way of escape, and they were in the presence of another suddenly. They just suddenly realized that they were in a bigger world than they thought. The world which had collapsed on them opened just slightly, and they could feel a cold breeze coming from somewhere, blowing on their faces. And it was wonderful. They began to talk to each other about the deep things of their lives. Then they began to tell the story again, says Luke. He was ours. He was deeply one of us. Oh, he was so clear and so charismatic and so truthful too, and gentle. But underneath it, he possessed the courage of a lion. Oh, we rose in him. Do you remember? We rose in him as never before. And then the companion who had joined them unrecognized asked them about the details, and then began to tell them about the long wave of faith. It's always important to hear about the long wave of faith. There is always joy and then sadness as well in the long wave of faith, creativity and then trauma. There are parts of the quest of faith which are pleasant to enjoy and parts which are as steep as a cliff up which we must climb. And not everything along the way is heroic. There are real lives that run into real drama and real trouble sometimes. Oh, in the end, when we're writing the story, we always write the heroic parts, but underneath it, it is men and women and children exactly like us, just like us, working at the mystery of it all, being touched by it every now and then. It's the real stories that are perhaps the most interesting. We all know that Ludwig van Beethoven ended up deaf and at the end of his life was unable to hear his own music, except in his head, was unable to hear the adulation of his own music. But did you know that J.S. Bach died a blind man? He had been operated on by a surgeon who blinded him. and that years later, George Frederick Handel, the great composer, died as a blind man. He had been operated on by an eye surgeon who had taken his sight from him, and that it was the same surgeon in both cases. I didn't know that. This is part of the real life, not just the glory of the music, but the tragedy, the wave, the long wave that goes up and down. It's real for all of us. And then they shared a meal, says Luke. It was a familiar meal to them. A bit of bread, a bit of wine, some conversation, and then suddenly they realized in whose presence they always were, the great road setting itself under their little broken road. I have been a purveyor of Burns suppers for about 35 years, and I backed into Robert Burns in 1975 and have come to love him as a friend. There is something so wonderfully charismatic about him worldwide, and I was interested to realize that it was only 5 years after his death that the first Burns supper was put together, 1801 in the Scottish town of Greenock. Some of Burns' friends gathered on his birthday around a table to share a common meal and to talk about him and to remember him, and that's where it all started. And now a great road underlies our common road, and every 25th of January all over the world, Scots and those who want to be rise up and play the pipes and toast the haggis and raise a glass to the immortal memory of Robert Burns. Well, just by the simple breaking of bread around a table, and suddenly you know in whose presence you are. It's a dawning revelation, you see, that there is a great road running under our broken little portion of the road all the time. As James S. Stewart used to call it, these are the everlasting arms, and no matter how far down you go, down and down and down, below the known way, below the known steps, no matter how far down you go, underneath you cannot fall from the everlasting arms. That is so brightly encouraging. Build up the highway, says the prophet, clear it of stones. See, your salvation comes to a city not forsaken. Isn't that remarkable news when we're building every day? Our road is precious because we're building it and because we are paying a cost of construction. It costs us to be alive and to push forward, and we know the cost well. It is also precious because our piece of it is an integral part of a great road along which the sacred is walking towards an eternal city. I was at a preaching conference once in Nashville, Tennessee, and there were about 800 of us there, and Leonard Sweet, one of the gurus in American churches, was speaking to us in an afternoon. And he said, in this postmodern age, everything has to change. These days, it's like painting your masterpiece on the wall of a building that has been condemned. It is time to change the way we do things. No longer is it one, it's two, and I felt as if he were sandblasting my face, with every word, sandblasting my face. And I felt myself saying, I'm too old to change, I'm too old to change. I've changed enough, I'm not going to change. And at the end, he had a great rock and roll piece of music, filled the church to finish his talk, and we stood under a speaker which was so boomingly loud we had to shout to be heard. And there was another Canadian lad there, and we said to him, would you like to go to dinner? And he said, yes, where would you like to go? And we suggested a restaurant. See you there at 6:30. He said, off we went. And I was totally bereft, didn't feel like eating, didn't feel like living. And the taxi driver said, where do you want to go? And we told him the name of the place. He said, you don't want to go up there. It's full of hookers and druggies up there. You don't want to go there. We said, well, we saw it in the advertising. It looked pretty good. So we got to this little Victorian house in a little old suburb, and there was a side garden and the smell of lily of the valley everywhere. Didn't even look like a restaurant, just a house. And we went in and sat inside, and our friend didn't come, and he didn't come, and 6:30 came, and he didn't come, and other people were going in. You sat around large tables, and you paid $10, and you could have as many courses of anything as you wanted, good old home cooking. So guitar players sat with visitors from out of town, and neighbors came, and black people sat with white people, and strangers with friends, and in all the little rooms they all sat and had dinner, and they laughed. We were still sitting out in the foyer waiting for our friend. This man in a baseball cap came through, and my friend David said to him, who are you? He said, oh, I own the place, just a young guy. And David said, tell me the story. Well, He said, I made a lot of money for a restaurateur years ago, and he fired me. And I was so mad, furiously mad, I was spitting nails. And I got lost in traffic here in the downtown, and I ended up on a side detour, and I ended up on this street, and there was a for sale sign on this building, and as soon as I saw it, I knew that was my restaurant. And I got out of the car, and I phoned the agent. It had been for sale for 20 minutes. He said, I phoned my mother, and then I phoned my mother-in-law, and I said, I need $10,000 from each of you right now. And they put it onto their credit cards, and I bought the place. It was full of motorcycle parts and smelly men when I went in. So for the next few months, I began working on it, a piece here and a piece there. And I tried to pay all my bills, and I was working away at it, and one day the mail came, and I opened the mail, and there was a letter from the bank saying that I'd missed something, and I owed $1,400 by Monday. He said, I didn't have 14 cents. And I was a wreck. And there was always one room in this house that used to feel lovely to me, a centering space. And I walked into that room, and I said, I can't do this, but I know it was meant to be, so you're going to have to do it for me. And I walked out back to my kitchen, and there was a knock on the door, and it was a woman, and she said she was from the Archdiocese of Nashville. They were going to have a conference a year from then. Some bishop was visiting. Was this a restaurant? Did it cater? He said, well, I guess we will cater. Give me a list of what you cater, she said. So he said, I took a piece of blank paper, a serviette or something, and I wrote down hors d'oeuvre things. She said, that's fine. We'll take 100 orders of that. I'll give you the check right now, $1,400. He took it to the bank. He said, I put out a call to my friends to see if they'd like to dedicate a chair in memory of someone they loved. I got so many chairs and so much money, I was able to buy the food for the restaurant for the opening, and we opened on Thanksgiving Day, not a day earlier or a day later. And the people who owned the house came that night, a man and his daughter, and I said to them, I love this house. And they said to me, she loved it too. Our mother, my wife, died here 2 years ago of cancer, and she loved the smell of the lily of the valley. Oh, I loved it too, he said. Yes, she died in that room right over there, in that room. And we went back after dinner to the hotel, and I looked in my notes over which I had been lamenting, and the last thing Leonard Sweet said that I wrote down was, these days, God is far more active in the world than in the church. And I took great heart from that. The great road is underlying the small road on which we walk all the time, and it is so powerfully encouraging. Well, we had to face the Canadian kid we missed. Where were you, he said. I went to a restaurant, well, it turned out to be in the next block. The entrees started at $90 each. He said there was no one in there but me. I had a glass of water, looked at the menu, and left. We said, we're so sorry, the music was so loud, we just couldn't hear and tell you the right name. He said, don't worry about it. If I'd been on time, you never would have heard that story. Our road is not unknown, although our days may be. And the road we are building is a sacred road because a great power walks upon it with us, opening a way for us hand in hand as we too walk towards a city which cannot be shaken.